This video I'm going to go over a few things. First, the tools. I'm using a PH1 Phillips screwdriver, which is a small screwdriver. Also, you might find it useful to have a 1.5 millimeter Allen wrench, a small pair of needle nose, and a 7/32 nut driver, a 2.5 millimeter Allen key, and a 3/32 Allen key. Also a pair of scissors, an X-Acto knife, thin CA, and a 1/4 inch nut driver. These are the tools that I keep handy whenever I'm going to be working or making some kind of adjustments to my Ornithopter. Now, I also have a piece of wire here, and I'm going to go over a couple of tips that I have found very useful, and I thought I might share these with you. We all have dealt with thin CA, and it kind of gets like water. Actually, it's worse than water in that it likes to travel. So what I'm going to do is show you how I go about gluing in my bearings. This is a thrust plate, and it has a bearing that is pressed into the center hole. And first off, a trick to putting the bearings in, if you do remove them, sometimes they can be really tricky to get in, but it's because it has to be perfectly flat in order to go in. Once you get it perfectly flat, then you can see that it does go in. Now, if you don't have it flat, see there, the bearing's back in, but I've left it, the flange out, because I need to put some CA on there, and then I'm going to be pressing this bearing down like that. So again, I'm going to just press it back out flush here, and then I'm going to wick CA around this. Now, the way I'm going to do it is probably a little different than maybe what you do, or maybe what you've seen. With this piece of wire, and this happens to be just, actually this is a piece of solder, and that works really well. Doesn't need to be very long, but the idea is I want to make sure it's clean, and then I'm going to open my bottle, and I'm going to take my wire, and you can use a piece of stiff wire, but my point is I'm going to drop this down in the bottle, and the CA, I'm going to cover the wire with it, lift it back out, and I'm going to wind up with a small amount on the wire. The first thing you're going to do is make sure your flange is open, and then you're going to stick your wire into the CA and just kind of dab it around. Maybe you got to do it a couple of times to get enough on there. You don't need a lot. You just want to just reinforce the G10, and then take your rag, in my case I use just a towel, and put it on and push it down, and then lift this straight off, and you will wind up with a CA'd flange. And then you can turn the bearing over, and again run just a little dab of CA, and you can just move it around the outer edge of the bearing, and what we want to do is just reinforce the edge of the G10 where the bearing is, because there's a lot of pressure on this bearing. This is one that's probably most critical, so you want to do both sides. On the other bearings that are in the kit, when you take this apart, and I'm going to show you how to do that in just a minute, you're also going to press those back, glue the flange, and then press it back in. There's 2 bearings on each one of the plates, and these plates are on either side of the main frame. So with that information, that should help you out as far as putting your CA. There's a couple of places that are going to get CA, and I will show you on my mock-up frame. One of them is this mount, and then the other one is this mount here, which on the frames, whenever you get it, you're going to take out these two bolts, and that will reveal this mount in the back and the mount in the front. and you just want to make sure those are seated well, and then run a bead of CA on the bottom and on the top on both sides, and you should be fine there. As far as the mechanism, whenever you get the frame, it's going to be just like this. It's going to be together, and you can spin it. It should spin freely. I will tell you that whenever you put this together, you can wind up with, like right now, it's very free. You can see that it's spinning. Now, I've hit the glide lock because if I turn the frame upside down, then I can turn it in both directions and it will not hit the glide locks. But if I turn it right side up, now I can only spin it in one direction. So if I try to spin it backwards, see, it's catching. It's hitting the glide lock. So we want to always make sure whenever you first mount this up and you're testing to make sure the rotation is correct, you want to always have the model upside down, because that way if you have it backwards, you'll be able to figure that out. But more importantly, if you have it going backwards, and if the model was up like this, whenever the model backed up or hit glide lock, it would instantly stop the motor, and you could do damage to the gear train. So always make sure whenever you first test to make sure you got the motor going in the right direction, you have the frame upside down, and you're going to make sure that the rotation is the correct way. What is the rotation? Since it's going to be upside down, we're going to be looking at it like this, and you want to make sure that this is going to be rotating in this direction. So with this upside down, looking at what would be the right side, this is the right side, so I'm going to turn it around. This being the right side, I want to make sure that it is going the proper direction, and the proper direction is going to be going clockwise. So we want to make sure that this is turning clockwise when we have the model upside down and we're looking at this side of it. So we want to make sure that this is rotating in this direction. And if it's rotating in that direction, then that's correct, because when it backs up, see, it's hitting the glide lock. So again, the right side goes clockwise. And the nut and bolt should be on the top, as where this is the center. This is going to be the place where the thrust plate is going to mount. So you're going to make sure that the screw hole is on the bottom, on the right side, and the nut and screw on the gear is at the top. And again, rotation, the motor should be turning the gears clockwise. Okay, here I'm going to show you how to disassemble and reassemble the frame after you've glued the bearings. What you're going to be doing is, in here there are two bearing plates. This is the plate that the motor is going to mount to. There's another plate that attaches to this. It's already mounted, and you see that right here. So this plate is not on there, but this is the plate that's underneath this one, and it has two bearings in it. Now these bearings, you'll notice that they face in different directions. In other words, one goes in from the outside and the other goes in from the inside. And the reason for that is so that the bearings will stay seated. So more importantly, this piece will only go on one way. And what I mean by that is, in order for all the holes to line up, you notice this has two holes on this side and only one down here on this side. You always remember two holes goes to the top. 2T top. So whenever we mount this, we're going to make sure that we put the two holes in the top. Also, the single hole goes to the front. So if we take a look at this frame here, and we put a single hole in the front and two holes to the top, we can see we have two holes here. Obviously we have a single hole there, and if we take and lay this on there, all of these holes line up. So we have this here, all of these holes, they are in line. So that's 6 holes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And in this piece is the matching piece that goes on the other side, and it has 2 holes in the top, 1 in the bottom, 1 up front, and it's going to match with those holes. So now we have these pieces where they belong. The next step is to go ahead and put in the bushings, or the spacers. And so what you have to keep in mind with spacers, I'm just going to lay them up here. There are 3 different size spacers used. The only thing you got to keep in mind is that a spacer goes between this plate and the main frame, and also one goes between this plate and the main frame. Whatever you do on this side, you're going to be doing on the other side. So initially, you're going to take the small spacer and put one underneath or over each one of the 6 holes on this side. And on the other side, you're going to be putting one underneath each one of the holes here. So you're going to have 4 spacers, 1, 2, 3, 4 on this side, and on this side you're going to have 6. So remember, the small spacer goes on first. It goes in between these plates, and then the next spacer that's going to go on. So if you can imagine, you're going to have the 4 spacers or 6 spacers on this side, the 6 spacers on, then you're going to put the largest spacer. You're going to be stacking one of those over each one of these holes. So now you've got a smaller spacer on the underside, and you got the big spacer on the top side. And then you're going to be putting the gear guard on. And whenever you mount the gear guard, you got to keep one thing in mind, and that is whenever it goes on, it's only going to go on one way, and it's going to be like this. So if we take a look at this frame here, it's already up. You can see that we have the gear guard mounted here, 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 and here. Now there's 3 sets of spacers that are exactly the same. The spacers in this row are the same, the spacers in this row are the same, and the spacers in this row are the same. And it's because that plate, remember these 2 plates, this plate and this one, they all come in contact with these bolts. This bolt here and set of spacers are different because this plate is not affected by this bolt. So that's where the 3rd size spacer comes in. So now with this bolt here, it's going to use the large spacer that we used on these bolts, and also it's going to be using the smaller or the middle spacer. So what you do is you take the little spacer and put down, and then the big spacer on top of it. And so that's how the spacers line up. Remember, you only have 3 spacers, and the small one goes on the frame, and then the bearing plates set on top of it, and then the larger spacer goes on, and then the gear guard sets down, except for this one here, which would be this hole here. This one here is the one that gets the odd size spacer, which is the middle spacer and the big one. The rest of them get the big spacer and the little spacer, and again they set between this, the main frame, and this plate. So with that, the spacers shouldn't be confusing, shouldn't be a problem, and actually it should go together for you really easily. So I'm going to go ahead now and start prepare to take this apart so that we can get on the inside, and I'll show you what I mean. Okay, to take the frame apart, I'm going to be working with it inverted, and I'm going to be using the nut driver, the 7/32 nut driver, and the 2.5 millimeter Allen, and I'm going to loosen all of the screws that are in the gear guards. So I'm not taking them all the way off, but I'm just getting them real close, within a couple of turns of being done, or being able to remove them. Alright, so I'm going to start by taking the first one, which is going to be here, and removing the spacers. Remember, this one has the middle size and the large spacer stacked. So I'm going to take my bolt now and put these spacers on it, put the nut on it, and set this aside because I know where this goes. Remember, this has the large spacer and the middle spacer, and it's going to go in this hole here, which is at the top of the bird, and the last hole at the front on the gear guard. Now I can go ahead and remove all of the others, and again I'm going to stack those because they are all the same. So I'm going to turn it upside down, or right side up now, and just pull the screw and let the spacers fall. And again I'm going to put the spacers on the screw and put the nut on and set it aside. Now I can mix it with this because those are definitely two different ones. Remember, I know where the oddball goes. The oddball is the one in the front and at the top. So again, the same thing. I'm going to remove the next one and pull out the screw, let the spacers all fall, and again just put them on the bolt. And then put the nut on, and this just kind of keeps everything together so that I don't lose something. Okay, and then we can take out the last one. Now the last one's also going to have the glide locks, which I did not talk about earlier. So let me just pull these and drop the small spacers. And we're just going to leave this spacer attached to the gear guard, and that way I know where it goes. So I know this was the glide locks, and I know it's the back end, the one closest to the notch. This is where the glide locks go, and it is the last hole in the gear guards. So again, I'm going to set that aside. Now the next thing is to go ahead and disassemble the gear train here. And for that I need a number 2 Phillips screwdriver. So I'm going to hold the gears and undo this screw. And I'm going to take this screw out. And I have a special tool that I've made for this purpose. And it's nothing more than a block of wood with a piece of wire in it that's about 1.5 inches long, and I'm going to push that in the hole, and then I'm going to hold the gear and the frame and press. And now what I've done is actually press the gears apart. So you can see the first gear came off, and then the gear on the other side is now off. So, and notice that now my glide locks have come out. Now these are 2 different ones, but it doesn't matter which side you put which one on. The only thing that matters is that they go on in the right direction, and I'll go over that in just a minute. So now I've got the gears off, and now you can see that we've revealed. I'm going to go ahead and pull the shaft out, and now we can reveal the gearbox, and all I have to do now is take out one more screw, and this will all come apart. Actually, one screw will remove half of the gearbox, it will remove the small plate. And then there's two other smaller screws I can take out to remove the other part of the plate. So now you can see we have the smaller bearing plate off, and if you take a look, this is what we're going to have to do. We're going to press the bearing back so that we reveal the flange, and then we're going to press this one back, and now I have both flanges revealed, and this is what you'll need to CA. Again, the little trick with the wire, dip it in the CA and then put the drops of CA around the bearing, and then you can use your wire to spread it around, and then you can use a towel or a rag and lay on top, and you want to pull this straight up so that you don't push any CA underneath the shield that's on the bearing. And you're going to turn it over and do the same thing again, just a little CA around it, and then again with a rag lay it on, push it down and pull it off. And then you want to check your bearing and make sure you've got it pushed down straight. It's really important that that bearing be seated back, the flange seated on the G10. So you're going to do it to this bearing or this set of bearings, which are on the small plate, and then we can set that aside. Now we have two more spacers and a nut that went on the smaller screw, so we're going to set that aside. And now there's two more screws that we can remove, or you can leave them. If you remove these two screws, then this plate here comes off, and there's a good chance that you can probably do what you need to do leaving this plate mounted. So I've just pressed back the bearings to reveal the flanges so that I'm able to glue those. So again, same thing, dip it in the CA and put the CA around it, and then with the rag press it down, making sure that it's straight. And then the same thing on the other bearing, around the flange, and then put the rag on and press it down, and again make sure that it's straight. So now I'm ready to put things back together. Now notice we have those small bushings are on the back side here, so we're going to continue with a small bushing there, a small bushing there, and a small bushing under here, and then we're going to flip it over and we're going to start putting the bushings underneath the other piece. Now with this, it'll only go on one way, meaning for the holes to all line up. You can see that if we lay this in place, notice that the top of the bird has two holes, one here and one there, which coincide with these two holes. So you simply line up those two holes, make sure that you have the single hole up in the front. So in order to start, I'm going to go ahead and put on the small bolt with the spacer, and then I'm going to put this on with this gear, which is the wire pinion and the 40 pitch gear. And the way that this gear goes on, this spring washer, which there's a spring washer, it's really important that it be in place. Spring washer goes there, and this goes up against the motor mount side. So the spring washer goes toward the big plate. So that way you'll get this gear in the right direction. So now I'm going to go ahead and put the spacers on. So I will find the small bolt. Remember the small one that I took out? So we're going to put on the two spacers, and again in between these. And again, I like to work from inverted or with the bird upside down, and all the heads of my screws are going to be on the right side. With it inverted, they'll all be on the motor side, which would actually be the right side of the model. So take the bolt, take the spacer, and I'm going to go ahead and slide this in first. So I'm just going to key the spacer over the hole. I'm going to drop the bolt in on this side. I'm first going to put the spacer, so I've dropped the spacer. Now I'm going to drop my gear back into the bearing hole. And then again, the gear, the back side, the flat side of the gear is toward that larger plate. And I'm just going to spin it, make sure it's free. And now I can go ahead and put this plate on again. 2 holes toward the top, 1 hole toward the front. And put on the nut here. And when I tighten this up, I'm just going to bring this snug just to hold the parts together. I don't want to crank down on it. I want to make sure that that's still pretty loose. But I can check my wire pinion and it's spinning freely, and that's exactly what I want. So my next task now is to go ahead and reassemble all of the other stuff. So we can start with this piece here. Since I left the screw in the gear guard, I know this goes at the very back, and it goes, this is going to line up with a wire pinion. And of course, since the screw is on this side, then I know that this is going to go on this side. So I'm going to undo this, and we're going to start and work these bushings into place. So first step is the large bushing. Next step is a glide lock. Now here's the important thing about the glide locks. They have to go on in the right direction, and what you want to do is this curved surface goes toward the top of the bird. The notch surface goes toward the belly of the bird. So if I want to put it on like that, then I know that this has got to go this direction. So if we look at this and we steady it and put this on, this should go together like that. So now what we need to do is take and run a spacer between the frame and this plate. So I'm just going to slide it under there, work it over the hole, and now put this on. So now I have this piece here. The gear guard is in place, the spacer is in place, the small spacer is in place. So now I'm going to work the other small spacer. Remember, there's a small spacer that goes on this side as well. So now with a little bit of finesse, I'm going to back this screw back enough to let that spacer slide under there. And I'm going to coax it under with my Allen wrench. And as soon as I have it lined up, put on the next spacer, which is the larger spacer. Now I need the other glide lock, so I'm going to take the other glide lock. Remember, the large curved surface goes to the top, the notch piece goes toward the belly. So now that's in correctly. Now I need to go ahead and put in the other side of the gear guard. So I'm going to turn this over, match this notch with the wire pinion, set it down over the hole, and put it on the nut. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and lay it back, stand it on its back, and let's go ahead and put in, remember we had 2 of these, we should have 2 that are exactly the same, and then 1 that's an oddball. Have the large spacer and the middle spacer. Well, I know this one goes, remember, at the front, goes all the way up here. So why don't we go ahead and put that on, since we know that's where it goes. So I'm going to undo it. I'm going to take all the spacers off. I'm going to start by putting the screw through the gear guard, and then I'm going to put on the large spacer and then the medium size or middle spacer, and then I'm going to slide it through the hole after making sure that the notch is over the wire pinion. And then I'm going to do exactly the opposite. So first I'm going to put on the small spacer, and then I'm going to put on the large spacer, and then I'm going to rotate my gear guard up and so that I can put on the nut. So now I have that. Now I'm going to go ahead and put in the other 2, and these screws and spacers are exactly the same, but again the same thing. I'm going to disassemble and put on the first, I'm going to put on the large spacer between the gear guard and the bearing plate, and now I'm going to use the needle nose pliers to hold this spacer in place while I run the screw through it. So I'm just going to hold this down, and now I'm going to do the same thing with the next spacer on the other side. And now I'm going to take the larger spacer and put it on, and then put the nut on. And then there's one more set to go, and that's this set right here. So again, the same thing. I'm going to put in the screw, or the bolt, put in the large spacer first, put in the small spacer next, and again, it makes it easy just to use the pliers. Slide it over, line up the hole. Same thing for the other side. Just going to back the screw out so that I can put the spacer in place. And now I will put on the big spacer and the nut. Okay, again we check, make sure that everything is correct. And it looks like this is all correct. So now I'm going to take all the free play out of these bolts. In other words, I'm going to cinch the nuts up, not really tight. I just want to get the play out of it, so there's just a little bit of slack, so that they can be moved around slightly. I don't want them really loose, because what I'm going to do is let the gear kind of set where everything goes. So now I can still shift this stuff around, but there's not a lot of free play in it. Now, the next step is to go ahead and install the gear. Now, this is very important, and it's self-aligning. You can see that this gear is actually, I slid it in and it's free. What you have to be sure of is that whenever we line this screw up with the pinion, we have the hole up front, and on this side, which would be the left side, this nut and screw are at the top. If we were to do this way and check it, and we line it up, well, if we look, we can see that this screw is lined up with the wire pinion. The hole is here, but look where the screw is. The screw and the nut are on the bottom, and it's supposed to be on the top. So I know that this is wrong, so I have to put this on the other side. So again, I'm just going to move it over. And then the other thing that we want to do when we do this is we want to rotate this, and we want to make sure that our glide lock is floating. In other words, see it raising up and down. If it doesn't float, then I know that it's wrong. There's something that I need to really look at. So now, the next step is to go ahead and key this, and we want to time it. There's a reason that screw is back here like it is, and there's also a reason why, if you look at this gear close, you can see that there's a silver mark, and that marks that tooth. Well, that's the same tooth that's on this gear. So what we do is we line this tooth into that gear, we hold that, turn this over, make sure our glide lock is laying flat, and then we time it by putting this tooth into the same gear. But we have to make sure that that tooth is in the same tooth, the wire tooth, or the wire pinion, so that whenever they are engaged in this wire pinion, this tooth and that tooth are on the same gear. So you can see there I have it. This dot is in that tooth, which is in the middle, and again that dot is in that tooth, which is in the middle. Again, checking, the nut and bolt are on the top, and here the nut and bolt are on the top. So I know this is now all correct. So what we want to do now is we want to spin this around and slowly mash everything together. And you should get to a point where you're ready to put the screw in. Now, one thing about putting this screw in, and this is the 632 screw, you need a number 2 Phillips screwdriver to do it. You want to make sure to hold the, well, lucky I heard the camera, I ran out of disk space, so we're going to continue. You want to make sure and hold the gear and tighten these up, both screws, just to be sure that they're tight. And then you want to again check and make sure that the gearbox is free, and it should spin really free. If you have an issue where, and let me demonstrate, if I rotate these gears in opposite directions, in other words, I've turned that one this side a little forward and I've moved this side a little back to put a little bind. Now I got it a little better. See, it's not free. So the idea is that if I put these together and I get a tight situation, see, it's still a little tight, so still a little tight. There we go. Now we got it back. So if you wind up where it doesn't spin free like this, then you know that more than likely you just have one gear advanced a little bit more than the other one. And the way to fix that is just to hold one gear and rotate the other one either back or forward, and you will work it free. So now I'm going to go ahead and tighten these both up, make sure that they are tight. And then I'm going to check this. And yes, my gearbox is free. It's free to spin in both directions. And so now, because I've been spinning it, I want to go ahead and tighten up these other screws, the nuts and screws, and we want to do that a little bit at a time. And don't forget the very first screw we put in, the small one on the bottom. So again, we're tightening up a little bit at a time, and eventually we get it where it's tight. It just needs to be good and snug. And again, don't forget the one on the bottom here. And now we can check the gear train. And yes, that's pretty free. So I'm happy with that. So that's how you go about taking it apart, gluing or CAing the bearing plates, and then putting it all back together. And now, because you've done that, you know what it takes to take it apart, and you know what it takes to put it back together. Just remember, whatever you do on one side, you're going to do on the other, and there's only one set of spacers that's an oddball, and those happen to be way up front, and they're odd for the simple fact that this bearing plate does not come into contact with them. So there's a different size set of spacers here than they are everywhere else. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and end this video, and hopefully this has given you some good information about the Thunderbird and how to maintain and make gearbox repairs.